Hi, welcome. Welcome to Creative Spirit, where we have in-depth conversations with artists. So these conversations form part of a series where we explore an artist's motivation, what compels her to make art, what's her bigger purpose, and her contribution to the world. So to open our time together today, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we meet, live, work, and play, the Whadjuk Noongar people, and their elders past, present, and emerging. Acknowledging country is especially important in the context of how we as artists are so influenced by the country we live in. So today it gives me great pleasure to welcome Jane Stone, who will be talking about her creative influences.
Hi, Iris.
Hi, Jane. Just great to have you here. So I'll just give a quick introduction about Jane. Jane has been a practicing textile artist since the 1970s. She graduated from Curtin University, which used to be called the Western Australian Institute of Technology, fondly known of as WAIT, in 1978. Jane ran a business selling her designed and screen printed textile collection in shops and galleries all over Australia. Her textile designs were inspired by the magnificent flora in this country. She attended many craft fairs and trade shows throughout Australia to build her profile as a designer and maker. Jane's current textile practice involves hand and machine embroidery techniques. Her textiles pay homage to her early years growing up in a farming family. She recently held a very successful solo exhibition, Elemental, at the Victoria Park Centre for the Arts. This exhibition is currently online as a virtual exhibition, and I'll post some links to that with this video. So Jane, this is where we move on to your topic for today, which is creative influences.
Well, I suppose I can't really talk about my creative influences without showing the landscape of where I grew up. It sort of plays, it's in my mind quite a lot. This montage of photographs was probably done in the early 2000s, where I was trying to refocus my creativity and really start to understand more about where ideas came from and what influences everybody. So this was in my also early stages of learning how to use a digital camera. So you can see at varying times, but it also shows the actual landscape, the changing nature of, at any one time in a day, we see different Stirling Ranges. And this was the sort of the outlook of what we saw from our farm. Some of these are joined up. The bottom ones there are the farming land, so you can see the flat, but then you see the mountains rising up from it. So that really is entrenched in there. You can take the girl from the country, but you can't take the country from the girl. So and you can even see the influence this is now having actually in my current work, which is more piecing fabrics together and joining them up to create a bigger piece. And this is more a micro look at the land of the flowers, the bush. My mother and I would go each spring and walk in the bush, and I mean, I've always taken photographs, so a lot of these are just I use stitch to draw. So a lot of these I have drawn many times, but I just use my needle like a pencil and I draw, and it's really quite challenging but rewarding to see how you can create the effect of dimension from just using simple stitch, which I guess goes back to my childhood of learning to sew straight lines, running stitch, stem stitch, basic stitches, and now I just use it to draw with. This is probably where I first started to just, or I always thought hand stitching was something that old ladies did.
Yes.
I suppose I'm up there with that in that category.
That range now, aren't we?
Yes, yes. So I started probably teaching children in probably 2008, 2007 art classes, because I felt that my son and his friends weren't really getting enough creative time to just play, to learn to manipulate materials. And through it, the students asked me if I would teach them to sew. And so I had to buy threads and things like that. But through that, just working with a needle and thread, I just became so passionate about what stitching could do for me, and that I could pick it up and take it with me. It was so portable, and it really changed probably my whole work practice, I guess, because I could have a pair of scissors, needle and thread, and a bit of cloth in a plastic bag, and I could go anywhere. So school pickup, if I was waiting 5 minutes, take my son to music or sport, I always had this work with me. So it was pick up, put down, and then I, of course, later trained as an art teacher in the 2009, and I still needed my bags with bits and pieces. So a lot of the pieces I had little squares of fabric, not really knowing where or what, but I challenged myself with probably 5 colours. And the piece that you see here is social connections, and I didn't really know what I would do with it. I could have framed them on canvases, and I met while I was teaching a young man who asked me if I was a printmaker from down south, and I thought, well, screen printing, and I'm from down south. I said yes. He turned out to be my second cousin, and through him I've met all this family that were my grandfather's sisters' families. Or he was one of 10 children, and I only knew one of my grandfather's siblings. So this became, and I was working on this piece, and this became social connections, about how you can how families lose contact with each other. You know, they're all very warm and friendly. I've just met so many of them, and I even looked like them. That was really quite amazing. And a lot of them were makers, creative people.
Also, the arts is quite a strong theme in your family then. Sounds like
yes,
it, doesn't it?
I wanted to find out about my grandfather's sisters, because, you know, having only met one of his brothers, they were farmers. There had to be more. It wasn't a very dimensional way of seeing this family history that I knew. I wanted to know about the women and find out about my great grandmother, and a lot of the women actually sewed really well. The guy that I met that was teacher, he actually he can sew beautifully. Like, he's made wedding dresses, and I haven't seen any of his work, but it's what people who, in fact, I had never really met him, but I had so many people in common that knew him, and he's a photographer as well. So yes, it sort of became really important that I needed to record the social connection of my small town, and this could represent small towns, family members, but how you intellect, and I think I'm going to probably be going over time, how you meet people and make connections, and then realize that you've got all these other connections. And I don't know if it's a West Australian thing or but it's very much part of how I am with having come from a small country town, come away to boarding school, gone to university, and then creating my own business and my life up in Perth, away from my small community. But there was always this community that connected me back to my people, and that's where all the rings come into it, how social connections come in to it. You can see here there's little bits of the more detail of the work that you can that shows how the detail of my stitching, and yet it's simple stitching, and probably going back to my days in primary school of how we made dolls' clothes on gingham fabric. I don't think I've come very far from there, but I just tell stories more.
Yeah, that seems to be that gingham sort of what's that, smocking exercise. I don't know about you, but that was something that the kids at school did with us, and it's a real sort of foundational way of learning to sew, isn't it?
It is. It's I mean, it's like initially like a pencil. You learn very simple the elements, and I probably wasn't taught so much about the elements of art and design, even though it was art school, and maybe it was around, but you know, you only half hear things. And once I started to realize that my needle and my pencil were alike, it was the dot, the line, the shape, the color, all of those elements, the similarity is just so strong that I challenged myself. And this piece was probably the piece where I challenged myself to just use my needle and stitch without really looking like or drawing. Although I have previously drawn, or these are all based on shells, and I had previously drawn shells, but my shell drawings were probably 5 centimeters big, whereas each of these pieces are probably 40 centimeters square. And you can see in the at the side that the detail of which of my stitching to create surface, surfaces that kind of worked even though I was using just a variegated thread. So that has been probably my challenge along the way, to see if I could make my needle work like I could make a pencil work. And so this piece is about summer vacation. It's really about farming and the rotations of the crops. And in January we'd go down and have our summer vacation at the seashore. And I realized that my needle was in some ways just like the tractors and the plows and the harvester going round and round. Because if you look at the paddock from the air, you can see the patterns, whereas mine is probably more detailed, but it's the same meditative. They probably wouldn't think of being in a tractor as meditative, but you go round and round and you come out, you have an outcome of a crop and harvest, all of those things, and I have the outcome of a piece of work. And I had probably not thought so much that my work was, I had the same relationship with my tools as what my farming family have with their tools.
Yeah, making marks, isn't it?
Yes, making marks, yes.
That's beautiful, Jane. I love the effect of that variegated thread. It's really very special.
It is. I kind of could become addicted. I see variegated threads come up online to buy, and I go, oh, got to have that one, but I don't, because I have to really have a reason to use it. But then you've got to have things in your stash for such an occasion that you're ready to use. But as I have so many friends destashing, I try not to do that overbuying, and just try to utilize what I've got.
Yeah. And with so many friends destashing, you've got to help them out every now and again, don't you?
Oh, yes. Yes, you do. And I probably got, I don't know if I might have put a piece up that, oh, yes, this piece is pretty much all about other people's rubbish. Well, we won't say rubbish, but they're cast off what they don't want. And this particular piece with the little cup is a 3D piece, and this is probably a piece that started me truly on a journey of using salvaged fabrics, or fabrics from that people didn't have a purpose for, and I found that it took it took the stress away from going to a shop and buying the fabrics, because I always hated going and trying to select fabric, because I was used to going to the wholesaler, the wholesaler, and just buying black or white materials, and I couldn't buy pattern. Whereas this other piece, is all pieces, scraps from different people's quilting, but the pieces themselves, yeah. So these pieces are probably changed my outlook on how I buy fabrics, that I really like using people's cast-offs, and trying to just think of ways that I can utilize them. And the first piece is a lot of people's cast-off. We had a challenge with WAFTA, or West Australian Fibre and Textile Association, and I think it was called Altered State, and we were given a whole lot of bits and pieces to come up with something for an exhibition, and mine was a memory of fates and communities coming together and creating magnificent afternoon teas, where they brought in all the beautiful china and the flowers that had been growing in the garden. You know, the roses had been pruned the 10 weeks before, ready for these beautiful displays. All sorts of things, melting moments and cream buns and honeycomb, all made in these shoehorns of cream. It was just quite magnificent. And it started to make me think a lot more about the importance of all those traditions that families and communities have, that hold country communities together. And I had never put these two pieces together until probably this morning. And they were made for completely different purposes. The second piece is probably honouring my mother and father for building a house, and actually through that window is the Stirling Ranges, which is from the first slide that I used. And Mum always had a beautiful garden, biscuits, cakes, and the kettle was always on the stove waiting for whoever might drop in. Wallpaper on the wall, and the pieces, the fabrics from that came from bits and pieces of people's quilting fabrics, and leftovers from a school that I was working at once. The kids would waste so much fabric, and I'd just take it at the end of the year because I didn't really want them. So I've got a big bag of scraps that I just go to get work from, and again hand stitching, which is the wallpaper. I think
Jane, I love
the height of fashion.
Pardon me. I love that the view through that window is so iconically farmland, Australian farmland, isn't it? It's that sort of bleached yellow stubble.
Yeah, especially the summer after the harvest. It's very dry and arid, and that's where we'd head off down to the coast, down to Albany for our summer holidays to recuperate for the next year.
Yes, yeah, beautiful.
And I think this coming up, the one is the last one here.
Oh yes.
And again, it's to do with the seashore, but this time I'm using machine embroidery, free motion stitching, and just again pursuing that whole thing of drawing, and using my sewing machine as my pencil. And these pieces are all small pieces that I've suspended on monofilament, and you can see here the movement and the shadows and the reflections, and it sort of reminds me of mucking around in the water and watching all the little fish and the things that float in the water. Just fascinated me, the shadows that I could create with this work, and the fineness of this work. It's sort of probably a direction that eventually I will pursue even more.
Yes, they're beautiful. Yeah. So obviously, the environment, the land you live on, and where you went on holidays and that sort of thing has had a huge impact on what you create with your art.
Yes.
What is it that keeps you making art, Jane?
I just really like making. I like what my hands, my I suppose my brain, my eyes, the connection that those three make, where I could put a whole lot of stuff together and it might not work, but then if I play around by moving it around, and I just love seeing it come together to sort of harmony, I suppose. It creates some, because lots of times you can struggle and it just doesn't come together, and then all of a sudden it goes, oh yes, it's working now. So I guess it's like cooking a cake. If you don't if you just chuck it all in, well, I suppose cake's not really the most wonderful idea. It's playing. I just like playing, I guess. It's I'm just still probably haven't grown up. I'd like to have been a child for a lot longer and been able to play with yes, no, I just enjoy the play of manipulation of thread and I suppose I could always be drawing, but I find it interesting seeing what I can do with stitch.
Yes, yeah, it is. So what is it well, two things. What message does your work have? Now that might change from one thing to the next. So let's start with that one. Sort of what is the message that you convey or express?
I don't know that I necessarily have anything to express to other people, except I believe really strongly in being creative or finding something that is your raison d'etre, your reason for being, for keeping you grounded, or I suppose for me it's almost a meditative thing of working. My hand stitching is I suppose it's a way of grounding me.
Yes, because I was thinking, I guess, you know, the creativity doesn't always have to have a sort of a logical head reason, you know, mental thing behind it, so much as an emotional expression. And you talking about how play is important for you, and it's kind of an extension of that. And I'm wondering if that's something that comes. I mean, certainly the seashells one sort of does that for me. You know, when you're talking about the shapes kind of hanging, how they would hang in water. I mean, the seashells don't hang in water, I suppose, unless they're in a big wave. But there's that sense of suspension and magic in there.
Yeah, I suppose the magic is a really a good word. It's you put a group of materials together, and that you almost, maybe it's control, it's how you manipulate those materials to be to work, to satisfy a need. I can't explain my artwork really. It's just something that I do and have always done. I've made, I remember as a 4-year-old just making, whether it was out drawing with a rock, or drawing with a stick in the sand pit. And I suppose it's just become my work. It's my reason for being. I mean, you can sort of analyze it with the fact I've only one child. He's a boy. I don't have lots of grandchildren to make things for, and I don't know necessarily whether I would have been that kind of artist anyway, that kind of maker anyway, because I've probably been drawn to drawing from, I always wanted to be an artist from a very young age. And I guess I'm still in my journey of manipulating and making. And I've always said that I hope I'm making my best work for as long as I possibly can. And I don't have a message except the power of making.
Yeah, I know when you were doing those pieces that you had in kind of layers that you showed just now, and when you were first making them, and you'd really investigated the shapes of shells. It's back one more, I think. Yes. And I remember you'd really investigated all the swirls and the little crevices and all that sort of thing in some drawings that you'd done before that, because I was on a workshop where you were exploring all that. And that's something that kind of fascinated me, was how you had gone into that kind of microscopic detail there and expanded.
Well, I think you've got something there, because that's what I do. I do look at when I'm walking in the bush or along the river or the seaside. My head is down, and I see patterns in the sand. I see patterns in the leaves, the bark. I don't know, it does something to me. It's like almost a chemical reaction. It's exciting. It's excitement. And I guess my camera is always with me, and even in my laptop there are, when you said you need 6 images, I'm going, I think I've got so many more.
Yeah.
And I've got photographs of tiny little bits of things. I think, maybe one day I will use those in my work. Yes, I think my mind is active, and I think the stitching calms my mind to slow me down, because otherwise I have lots and lots of ideas that I can never fulfill those ideas. So with doing probably with textiles, just a slower way of working to calm the spirit.
Yes. No, well, it's lovely. It's funny because, isn't it, when I used to think that, in some Jane Eyre and those sorts of books where the women did a lot of embroidery, and I used to think, God, that would drive me crazy. That was before I'd done any hand stitching. But I thought after I'd learned how to do it and had really appreciated the calm and the peace, I thought those women probably needed something like that, because they were going nuts, not expressing themselves, and not being able to do much other than, sit around and do some stitching. I don't know. But it was an expression, I guess, I didn't appreciate at the time that I was first reading those stories.
I used to see my grandmother make, and she was a mother of 3 sons, but her color sense was just amazing. I suppose of all my relatives, she is the one that's probably influenced me the most in my creative endeavors, because I even have a lot of her needlework and threads and bits and pieces, and some of my work I have actually include little bits of both my grandmother's things from their work basket. When I've only just got one of my grandmother's work baskets because it was my mother's, and the other one my uncle gave me, just about the entirety of my grandmother's pieces, which I have, and think, I must do something with them. But I think what I am doing is, it's the heritage that I have through her, that instead of doing the traditional work that we saw in, like, the lady sitting on the couch in Downton Abbey, or we're just taking it further. And I suppose if there was any message about what I do, is about people seeing, as you said, the microscopic, the detail of the environment, which I just find quite inspiring, I suppose.
Okay, so I'm just thinking about that with inspiration, and I was thinking, just to sort of bring everything together now, what would you say to someone who needed to be inspired to make art, to create things? What would do you have something you would say to them as a way to go forward? Or
I would just say that to do it and to be determined that it's going to happen. I think actually I did write that word. Determination is probably what is the what you need to be able to make, because along the way, life, and there are other things that come in the way that prevent you from working. And through that, if you have that desire to make and create, you have to be determined to give yourself the time and space to do that, to because otherwise I think I've seen lots of people who are incredibly unhappy because they don't have that space in their life, and it's not that someone else is going to give you that space. You have to make that space.
Yes.
And that time.
Yeah, and it's part of self-care, really, isn't it? That when creativity is such an important part of how you ground yourself or calm yourself, or even if something that you get excited about, it sort of gives some oomph to life. If you don't let yourself have that, so as you say, the determination there to make sure that you get that space to create, and to dream a bit, and to go for walks and take pictures and think about, well, what could I turn that? Wow, that's so amazing. How could I render that in Stitch or whatever? You need space to do that. You can't have life just sort of continually falling in on top of you.
Lots of people say one day when I retire, or one day I'll make. Well, one day you do retire, and one day, or or one day when you finish work, well, what is the point? You have got to, I think, do lots of little bits along the way, so that when different things happen in your life, you have the emotional or the network. Because even the friendship group that textiles bring you is a very rewarding, because they are the people that can help prop you up and help you keep on going.
And that's that social connection again, isn't it?
Yes,
it's what comes through.
Well, in that social connection of a group that I belong to, one of the ladies is a sister-in-law of someone I went to school with, and I had met the brother of one of the other ladies, and these are people that I met quite randomly. So that social connection is very really important.
Yes.
I find it important anyway. It's part of I've got a couple of cousins, and we just get together and we talk family, and who the latest family member that we've managed to
track down,
track down, and some of it is tracking it down too. And because part of my ancestry goes back to a First Fleet convict, so and she had an interesting kind of past of how she actually she got arrested for stealing a silk shawl and a loaf of bread.
Wow.
So here I am, however many generations ago, I'm making textiles, not necessarily a silk shawl, but a fascination for textiles.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. That'd be another whole story, wouldn't it?
Well,
you're talking about the convict thing.
Yes, I have got ideas for working with that, but they haven't sort of come to being yet. Yeah.
And Jane, I know this from knowing you, that you've got some very interesting historical artifacts, and I'm thinking, that'd be a really good thing to do a bit of a video and interview of you and some other people with some of these incredible things that you've
that would be fantastic, Iris.
Yeah, I'd love to do that, so I'll keep that in mind.
And one of the pieces that you mentioned is a bedspread made up of possum skins, I think it is, or kangaroo. I'm not quite sure. And cut in pieces and stitched together. And I suppose I've seen this piece all my life. So again, the influences, the subconscious that you don't, of these, his, family pieces of how they play in your subconscious, or in my subconscious for making.
Yeah.
I find it quite fascinating.
Well,
and I don't really think about them until I start making, and then I'm thinking, why is this so important? Why am I using this way of working? And then I think back about some of these others, the pieces that I've got in my collection, that and I go, oh, that's why.
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely have to go into that in some depth for another time. We'll do that, and I'll get together with you and I'll have to have a chat about how to work something out here.
Well, that would be. I think that would be fantastic, because
that'd be good.
A lot of us that have our little secret stashes.
Yes.
Of historic pieces.
Yeah, and when do people ever get to know about them unless you can kind of do something, targeted about it?
Show and tell.
Yeah.
But what do you do with them when you no longer? I mean, in my family, I am called the keeper of the history, and if anybody wants to find out something, my brother or my family, they send them to me. I've forgotten what my but once, like, my son may not want to have all of these pieces that I have. What do you do with them?
Yeah, we'll have to explore that a bit another time, Jane. I just
I know,
because I can see it's so exciting, and we can see places we can talk about with this, but we'll save that for another. We'll have some discussions about all this, and then we can move on to create something special there. Yeah.
It's been a great talking to you, Iris, because you really do bring out the ideas in me that I've got them so far somewhere that to bring those ideas out. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, because I enjoy getting to know more about you as well, and just finding out what motivates you. Okay. So thank you so much, Jane.
That's okay.
And we'll just put your final slide up, because that's got some contact details, and then people can have a look at that. Beautiful. So we'll say goodbye now, and I'll leave this on the screen for people. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.